Hey everyone, welcome to the Reasoning Together YouTube channel. My name is Ashton Winningham, and for this intro video, I have some pretty important questions for you guys. The number one is, do you have any pain? And the answer is yes, right? We all have some kind of pain. We all have things that hurt us. We all have past issues and probably upcoming issues. We all have some kind of pain. So I want you to know, the whole point of this channel is to make something that can remind you that there is more to life than pain. There is more out there, and there is more abundant life. But so many people have been hurt deeply or even traumatized by churches, religion, all these different types of belief systems. My goal is not for you to say a sinner's prayer or to attend a new church or anything like that. I don't want I've heard too many stories. I've heard too much. So the goal is not to get you to go to a church, right? The only goal I have is to tell you about the man who saved my life. Now, when I say man, that is a severe understatement. He is God, God of all things, God of you and God of me, and God of all creation that exists, all things. All the oceans, all the animals, all of nature, all of space, all of time. So how can this God be, and why does anyone believe in this? It's not just a God that someone made up. In this video, I would like to talk to you about not just this God, but the God who created you inside your mother's womb and knit you together, and tell you why that's important. Why does it even matter? So bear with me, because knowing we all have some kind of pain, there must be a reason for that. There must be a reason for the pain we have. And some believe that reason is because God is evil, or because God does not exist. There are many reasons we could try and say, but I want to present you with the best reason for pain and the best way to overcome all of it. Bear with me as we walk through these reasons. I'm sure many of you will have things to say, so private message me, comment on the video, get in touch with me however you can. I'd love to reason with you. Let's dive in. In this video, I'd like to lay out 5 questions about why I am a follower of Jesus Christ, what that means, why it matters, why you should listen, okay? So the number one question I have is, why does it matter? Now, forgive me if I keep looking down, because I do have my notes here. I'm not a professional at any of this yet, but I would like to just make sure I hit all the points, just so that you can have a fair and understanding perspective. So why does it matter? I'm not going to tell you why I'm a Christian or all the evidences or anything like that before I talk to you about why any of this even matters anyway. If he is God, and if all of that is true, then why does any of it actually count, and how does it change our life, right? So there's a lots of emotional rave going on right now in our society about coexistence and making sure we all are accepting of each other's opinions and all those types of things. But the issue is, there's still a lot of pain. Even if we accept all of what each other have, we don't seem to come to any sort of consensus about how we're starting to grow, right? Some may view that coexistence as growth, but imagine if everyone just coexisted on different ideas of what the length of a mile is. Well, we'd be messed up, right? We would not be able to get around, because the length of a mile is, I'm pretty sure it's like 5,280 feet, right? It's very specific. So if someone told me that it was 5,281 feet, well, I don't have the ability to just coexist with that. In fact, if we're trying to go somewhere with that person, or if we're trying to move forward with that person, it's not going to work out. They're going to end up hundreds of feet off, and we're going to be all in the wrong places, okay? So in the same sense, we can't just treat all, like, the most important topic, right? All of everything all of creation, all of the animals. We can't treat this topic about God as just dismissible and coexistable on many different ideas. Now, different ideas are very important, right? We need these different perspectives, but we can't just sit here and say, this one can be true, and this one can be true, and this one can be true. They contradict. Now, is it okay to have contradicting ideas sometimes, and can we bear with that? Yes, absolutely, right? As a Christian, I run into many people who have completely contradictory ideas from me about my faith, about Christianity, right? There are tons of different little divisions out here and all these different ideas that people have. So is it okay to have different ideas? Absolutely. Okay, I'm not trying to shut down ideas. We need to understand better, and one person isn't going to have it all right. I'm not trying to say I have every single thing right, but the point that I'm trying to get across is everything can't be true all at the same time just for the sake of love. Love is watching out for one another. If I love that person who's telling me that a mile is actually 600 feet and not over 5,000 feet, well, they might end up driving to very wrong places and very sometimes dangerous situations. So in this case, I do believe it is dangerous. It is dangerous to be walking around in this world believing just any God, just any idol, right? So there is a case for a true God. That's why we have all these gods. It's not because we want something bigger than us to believe in. No, many atheist people, many people from all different backgrounds, whether you're raised Christian, whether you're raised atheist, doesn't matter. They have all come, not all of them, obviously, there are plenty of atheists still, but many people have come to at least this idea that there must be some God. Whether he cares about us or not is a very different question for a lot of people, but so many people believe there must be some God. In fact, top new atheist movement people, such as Richard Dawkins, he admits that you would be able to convince him of a God that created the universe and left. Or many other big names, right? Of these people who are very popular atheists, they admit that disproving God is impossible. You cannot disprove that a God actually created all of it. Can you say that, can you maybe prove evolution or something like that? Yeah, I know plenty of evolutionary theists and evolutionary people who believe in God or a God, right? But there's still danger in that. You can't just walk around saying, well, there is a God. Well, why does it matter, right? So my point of why all this matters is if Jesus was who he said he was, Jesus Christ of Nazareth, and I'll explain about all the accounts we have of him and who he actually was. Was he an actual person, or was he just some, fairy tale like plenty of these other gods we see? So if he was who he said he was, that's serious business, because that would permanently change every person's life, no matter where you come from, in a really positive way. He has a really, really loving and beneficial message, and it's for everyone. It's not just for a certain nation or a certain type of people who are able to accept it. No, the message is very simple. So it matters if he was who he said he was, and if he was not who he said he was, throw it all away. None of it matters. Okay. The question is, was he who he said he was? And I'm going to read a couple statements about who he said he was. And these are, I'm going to quote verses from the Bible. Now, many people are going to get shut off when I say anything about the Bible. Right? But I want you to know that these are some of this specific account that I'm going to be reading from the Bible is the Gospel of John. John was an eyewitness and walked with Jesus for 3 years of his life and recorded his ministry, recorded many important parts about it. Okay, so I just want you to have at least a little bit of comfort in knowing, hey, this was a real guy. And it's proven. There's people outside of the Bible, way outside the Bible, some of them not even Christian, right, who confirm the existence of Jesus and John, okay? The John who wrote the book of John. So let's talk about John 14:6. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Now, those things are kind of weird by themselves, right? How can you be the truth? What does that mean? So some of those things are a little bit difficult to understand on surface level. But if we really understand what he's saying here, is he is not only the path, right? The path for what? The path for it all. The life, which is literally, he's literally speaking of, he is life. He is what gives us life. And, the truth, I missed the second one. I skipped over it. But the truth, right? He is not fake. He's not trying to pitch a lie. He is the truth. He is the pinnacle of truth because he created truth. So, if what he said there is true, we got to pay attention, right? I'm going to read a couple more statements here about who he said he was. In John 8, I think it's 8:58, Jesus says, "Very truly I tell you, before Abraham was born, I am." Who's Abraham? What is he talking about? I am. That's a bit misleading right up front. It doesn't really make sense with just normal English. But what he's basically claiming here is he's speaking to a Hebrew crowd, and he's basically saying that even before your father, who existed long before you, one of the fathers of the nation of Israel, even before him, I still am. So he's not only claiming that he is their God, Yahweh, which Yahweh, all that means is that's just the Hebrew way to say, I am who I am. That is the name of God in the Bible, is I am. And he is saying, before your father was even born, I am. And that's yes, that's a claim to be God. And yes, that's also a claim to be outside of time. So he has some pretty important claims there. So he claims to be God. He claims to be the way, the truth, the life. And as we can clearly tell this in John 10:30-33, he says, I and the Father are one. Again, his Jewish opponents picked up stones to stone him because you are a mere man and claim to be God. So Jesus is claiming to literally be one with God. Well, in a very distinct manner that we are not, right? To his Jewish crowd at that time, they do not believe they're one with God. They do not believe that that's even a thing. Now we see as Christianity, as we start to dive into the more spiritual topics, the Christian understanding of people is we are able to be one with God, but not in the same sense that Jesus is God. We are not God. We cannot be God, but we can be one with him. He can be ours. We can be his, but we will not be ever truly him, right? There's a very big distinction of being one with him and him himself. So he claims to be one with him, right? But not just one with him. In a very distinct manner, he claims to be him and to be God. So that's a pretty important claim. And I just want to stress that quite a bit because a lot of people, there's in Islam or even Mormonism, like plenty of religions out there will try to tell you Jesus does not claim to be God. Even people say there are such thing as non-Trinitarian Christianity. I know this is like useless words right now. It's kind of like a word jumble. But a lot of people, the point is, a lot of people try to say that he did not claim to be God. Well, there are a couple examples of where he did. So if he was who he said he was, that's pretty important. He claims to be our redemption, our way out of pain, out of all these things. So I'm going to dive more into why all of this matters at the end and what the changes are and how it all looks. But for now, we're going to jump to the next question, okay? So I'm going to jump settings here, but the next question I will read to you in just a moment. All right, so we get that if he was who he said he was, it matters deeply to every single person, whether they even care about it or not, right? So we have to have a couple of steps here, though, of testing this, of seeing, well, how do we know who he was and what he did? So that is the first question right there. And the first question of testing if he was who he said he was is, who was he? What type of person was he? Where was he born? Is this a real guy? Or is this just some, story that a bunch of people got together and wrote, and that's that's that. So please take note. I will have a evidence section later, how we can trust these sources that I have and how we can trust these eyewitness accounts, right? Eyewitness, were they really eyewitness? Were all of them eyewitness? So I will have a section for that at the end, but I know that the evidences don't really matter if you don't at least understand what's the message of Jesus. Why should we even care, right? Who was he as a person? Was he a hypocrite? So let's talk about that a little bit. All right, so according to these eyewitness accounts that we have, Jesus was perfect. He was an ethical genius, a miracle worker, and he was not a hypocrite. His life was lived very openly, and he would live in perfection. Now, according to the Bible, perfection is without sin. And a lot of people go crazy when they hear the word sin, because sin can be a convicting word, or some people can even call it condemning. Sin is not about condemnation. All sin is the separation from the things that separate you from God. Okay? So anything that you do that's outside of what God has for you is sin. But people take that drastically and say, well, God doesn't want me to have freedom. God doesn't want me to do all these things. The whole message of the Bible is about God creating humans, and yes, he does prosper them. Now, in our fallen world, we will go through trials, of course, and there will be pain. Everyone will have pain, and the Bible clearly acknowledges that all Christians will have pain, if not more pain than the other ones, because of their commitment to Christ. But God wants to bring us joy regardless of how much pain is going on around us. And so staying without sin, staying in line of what God has for us, is going to be the most blessed thing we can do. So he was without sin. That means he was living perfectly in line with what God had intended for people. Now, let's continue. He was, ethical geniuses. And we can probably say that there are a lot of ethical geniuses. And yet none of them tend to bear their own standards. We can all sit here and, talk about ethics and dive really, really deep into it. But when it comes to it, we can never tend to hold all of our ethics at a perfect level. None of us can reach that perfect ethical standard. And just so there's some clarification here about the words, just in case if we got a younger audience or something and someone doesn't know what the word ethics exactly means. According to Oxford Languages, it is the branch of knowledge that deals with moral principles. An example of a moral principle is it is bad or it is wrong to murder someone without cause. Now, I'm not saying this is wrong or right. I'm just saying this is an example, okay? So Jesus Christ is the perfect embodiment of true holding to his ethical standards. And that's where we get all these ethical geniuses, all these people who can talk about morals all day long, but there is never a recording from anyone in history who has ever said that Jesus slipped up on these ethical standards. The only thing that Jesus ever did wrong, which is the reason he died on the cross, according to the Jews, it was wrong, was blasphemy. And blasphemy means calling yourself God, basically. They had an understanding of a Jewish Messiah, a person that was going to come and save them. And Jesus was that person, but they did not receive it because he claimed to be more than just the Messiah. They did not understand that the Messiah would also be the Son of God, one with God. Okay, so this is not just some average case of a man. There are many outside attributions to Jesus which tell us, outside the Bible, right? Non-biblical sources tell us that Jesus lived a very ethical life. The Sermon on the Mount is, according to many people, one of the best ethical standards of all time ever preached. And many people will say, yeah, but he stole that from other people here and there. Okay. But there is no attestation ever that says Jesus
failed at any ethical standards besides, according to the Jews, blasphemy. All right, so that is question 2. Who was Jesus? You know, Jesus of Nazareth, he lived 2,000 years ago, and as far as we can tell, he lived a perfect life. According to the Jews, he lived a perfect life, except for one thing, which is why they had to kill him. Even the Roman governors, there was a man named Pontius Pilate. He was the one who was governing whether or not Jesus should get killed or not and crucified, because that is what the Jews wanted to do to him. And Pontius Pilate said, I cannot find anything wrong with this man. Once Jesus told his Jewish people, if you find any sin in me or any wrong in me, pick up the stones and do according to your law and kill me. And they could not find anything wrong in him until they apparently found blasphemy. So, was it wrong that Jesus called himself God? Well, depends. Is it wrong for anyone to call themselves God? Yes. You can't just call yourself God just because you are what? You're just, you know, it is a literal logical error. The God who must exist created the universe, I believe 13.8 billion years ago, like the Big Bang Theory suggests. Some people believe 6,000 years ago, according to the Bible. Okay. But the God that we refer to, the Almighty God, is an actual being, and it is not just all nature, all being. It is actually a specific, independent being that does not need creation to exist. We, as people, do need creation to exist. Jesus, though, revealed in his resurrection that he does not live according to nature. He does not live according to what comes naturally to the world. So that's why it is, and with many miracles, right? With many things that he did. Now, how can we believe those things? Again, I told you, we're going to have an evidence section at the end of this video, and probably plenty more videos about evidences for why you can trust these things. But after extensive study, many people do find that this is pretty trustworthy. And if this is true, then we change our lives for this. Okay, so was it actually wrong for Jesus to claim that he is God? No, it was not actually wrong for Jesus to claim if he was God, to claim that he was God if he actually was God, right? That's not wrong. For just anyone to go about saying that they're God, though, that is in fact wrong. You can't just say you're God just because, I saw a video the other day that said someone died for 13 minutes or something. They flatlined and they said, I have a message to everyone. You are God. And it doesn't really quite make sense to me, because God is an independent being who actually created you. So you might say you are one with God in some sense, and I can agree from a Christian perspective. In one sense, you do, you rely on God, you're part of that, but you're not God in and of yourself. Okay, so that is the end of that. I'm sure there will be many more history lessons about who Jesus actually was, a lot more into his ministry, a lot more into what he taught and preached. But those are the overarching ideas of who Jesus was. A perfect man. According to every ethical genius we've ever had, he was a perfect man. And he lived a life without hypocrisy. He lived a life of humility and justice, but mainly love. And his love took precedence over justice. All right. So there was much about Jesus, about who he was. Even in just the 3 years of ministry, there is so much that we could talk about. But I want you to get the general idea that Jesus was an actual man. If there is any person, I've heard non-Christian scholars say this, that if there was any person that we could say definitely existed 2,000 years ago, it would be, right, Caesar, right? The obvious ones, the governors who had worldwide control. And then if there was anyone else, man, it'd be Jesus. Jesus has more evidence than his governors existed, like Pontius Pilate, like Tiberius, like kings around certain nations. Jesus has more evidence outside the Bible that he actually existed. So that's the point I want to get across. He was an actual man. He did exist. Let's hit question 3 and 4. Again, I'm going to be changing setting, but I'll hit you with these in a second. So we get that according to what we have,
Jesus was who he said he was. And in fact, like we talked about earlier, that does matter. That does affect everyone. Whether or not you can bring yourself to believe that after just, a couple minutes of watching, that's up to you. And again, there will be much more about the evidences, but I want to give you a look into the life of a Christian, what it actually means, and not Christian as a religion, but Christian as having a personal relationship with God. So the next two questions are, what does being a follower of Jesus Christ mean? And how can I follow a man that lived 2,000 years ago? Right? Those are both two pretty important questions that you would have to know before you can even call yourself a Christian, right? You can't be a follower of Christ without knowing what that means to be a follower of Christ. So, let's talk about it. In Matthew 7:15 through 20. So Matthew was a tax collector. He was a man that, sorry, I gotta adjust the camera here. He was a man that not many people liked, okay? Tax collectors were very, very hated back then. And, so he was a man, and he was once called out of his office by Jesus, and Jesus talked to him, and Jesus made him a follower of himself. So that is who Matthew was. Matthew, apparently, we believe that Matthew wrote a gospel, okay? A gospel literally means good news, but what it actually is an eyewitness account of Jesus' life, death, resurrection, etc. So, in Matthew 7, this is the 7th chapter, and the 15th through the 20th verses, he tells us, and this is not exact quote, but this is the idea of what he tells us, is we shall know his followers by their fruits, and by their love is also stated somewhere else in the Bible. But the word fruit in the original Greek context refers to someone's deeds as exponents or processions of their hearts, right? So, aka their works motivated by their faith. So you shall know the people who follow Christ by what they do. Again, I'm gonna address something that's very, very important. Many people have been hurt by churches, excommunicated by churches, exiled by churches, all these different things. Many people have unfortunately been, traumatized. Horrible things I've heard that have come from the church. And it's a big issue. But this is important, that many people can say they're Christians, but you're only a Christian if you have the fruit of what being a Christian is, right? That's how we know people can be and are followers of Christ, is by their works. Now, does that mean that you have to work to get to heaven? No. That just means that your faith in Jesus, if you have faith in Jesus, right? That's what being a Christian is about. If you have faith in Jesus, then it should show in your life. Your works should show that you, in fact, do follow the teachings of Jesus, the love of Jesus, etc. So those things need to be present in order for you to actually be a follower of Christ. Are you going to make mistakes? Yeah, everyone makes mistakes. But someone who is out here abusing church leadership power, that's disgusting, and I can confidently say they are no Christian. Okay? All right, and then the second verses that I wanted to quote, or not quote, but just remind you of, are Matthew 22, 36 through 40, which tells us the root of all faith, all of the laws written in the Bible, and the greatest commandments, which are to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. And the second is similar to it, which is love your neighbor as yourself. Those are the two key components of faith, right? So those are the two key fruits or works that you should be able to see out of all Christians. They should love the Lord their God, the Lord, which translates as Yahweh, right? Their God with all their heart, all their mind, with all their soul, with all their strength, and they should love their neighbor as themselves, which is difficult. I understand that. And none of us are going to be able to do it perfectly, but I do also understand that that is a very, very important attribute of seeing if someone is a Christian or not. So that is what it means to be a Christian. Now, let's continue. All right, so the fourth question
is about how can I follow a man who died and lived 2,000 years ago? How can we even do that? And the answer for that is quite simple, right? He claims to be God. A timeless God is not time-bound, right? So him living 2,000 years ago, he is just as present today as he was 2,000 years ago, as he was 15,000 years before that, as he was for eternity, as he will be for eternity. There's no issue when it comes to the timeliness of God, right? If Jesus is who he said he was, then he and his teachings and his love and his promises are all eternal. If he was God, those things are all eternal. So that no amount of time can separate us from the love of Jesus, okay? And if you want to hear just a little bit more about why we believe that and what we believe can separate us from God, read Romans 8:38 through 39. Okay, those verses are going to reveal that nothing can separate anyone from the love of Christ. Nothing, except for themselves. Okay, but no love is going to be ended after time. No, it says no height, no depth, no angels, no demons, right? Nothing can separate anyone from the love of Christ. Okay, let's skip to the next questions. All right, so the final question. What is the evidence? This is question 5, okay? So before we dive into this though, I'm passionate about this, and I know plenty of people who are passionate about the opposite side, about disproving Christianity and all theism and all these types of things. Before we talk about the evidences, check your heart, okay? I will check mine too. I will make sure I'm being transparent and honest. But I really would like to invite everyone to make sure you have a good awareness of where you're coming from. And are you being honest with yourself, okay? And just hearing out the case. Don't go typing in the comments all these things until you've heard out the full case, all right? Let's talk about a couple things. Couple main pieces of evidences. We're going to go with some surface level ones, and then we're going to get a couple deeper ones. I don't want to spend too long because this is the intro video. This is probably the longest intro video anyone's ever seen. But I love it, so I'm going to keep going, but it's going to be somewhat surface level, but we'll get a little bit deep into some of these topics, okay? So the very first evidence and how we can know there is truth and how we can know all these things. Well, we have to first ask ourselves, is there such thing as truth? Which is, I know that seems like a really weird question to be the first thing to ask. Some people will instantly say yes, but you really have to question yourself, is there such thing as truth? Or, can we prove that there is such thing as truth? And the answer is actually no. We cannot prove 100% that everything is not just a figment of our imagination. Pretty interesting, right? New science reveals, quantum mechanics reveal that there's a thin ice between what's real and what can happen. We don't even know. We have no idea. Our science is very limited, okay? So if this is all just a figment of our imagination, we can't really actually prove it or not. But we don't live that way, right? No one is going to live pretending like it's a simulation or pretending like no one else is real, right? One of my favorite Christian influencer guys, his name is Cliff Connectly. He talks about, well, if I go up to this man, why don't I just smack him right across the face? Well, because you understand that number one, your actions have consequences, right? But you also understand that that's a living human being. If it was a tree, you wouldn't care. And nor would you get in trouble for it because it's a tree. It doesn't exist. Or it doesn't have like a mind of its own in some sense, right? So we don't live according to everything being a fantasy. We live as if there is truth. And there's good evidence that there's truth, right? The evidence that there's truth is when you smack someone in the face, your hand doesn't phase through their face, but it actually hits and it corresponds with reality, and he has an actual emotional response, right? Everything corresponds in some way. Everything is intertwined in some way. So do we live as if there's truth, right? Because there's good evidence all around that there is actual things. There are actual things. We have to get that across first. And the main 2 points that I'm making there is you can't 100% prove anything. You can't 100% prove that we're not just dreaming, or we're not just under some kind of thing, which is unfortunate. I wish we could 100% prove that. But at the same time, it doesn't really matter, because we live based on evidence anyways. We live based on the evidence that, yeah, there are real things. There's such thing as truth, right? We live based on that, okay? So we have to get that across when we're talking about Jesus, right? We cannot 100% prove that any of those gospel accounts or anything like that, we can't prove 100% that means that it was fact and it was truth. We cannot prove that 100%, just like we can't prove that our minds and what's going on around us isn't all fake. We cannot prove anything 100%, but we go based on evidence, okay? So, can we know truth? Are we able to understand and see those things which are true? And are we able to discover truth? That's also a different question. The punching example, though, or the slapping someone in the face example, goes pretty well in line with that question of basically our perception corresponds exactly with our reality. We don't just get, random pain strikes or anything like that. Like, we have a certain ability to perceive what is going on outside. Now, some people say, well, you're just presupposing that, right? You're just assuming that. Well, in some way, yes, you are assuming that what's going on out on the outside world is actually real, right? But again, that's how we live. You don't assume that it's all fake. Otherwise, you wouldn't take a step because, you wouldn't take a step into your kitchen, because that could be in a floor that could fall and you could die. Well, no, not really, right? So we 100% believe and can know because of repeated history and repeated amounts of time that has said, this is consistent, this is consistent, this is consistent, right? These things that are consistent reveal to us that, hey, we can trust our perception. In most cases, which we do have some types of, mental diseases and those kinds of things, which unfortunately people cannot trust their perception as much, but in an overwhelming vast majority, right, we can trust our senses that they are actually in accordance with reality. Now, I know we said we're going to start surface level, so those things might be like, what the heck is going on? Here's where we talk about the actual evidences, okay? I wanted to get those two difficult ideas first, so that we don't just discount the evidences and say, well, those are just, that's just a tiny piece of evidence. Why should we trust that? Well, every piece of evidence points to something. May we be looking at it the wrong way? Okay, it's possible. That's why you can't just trust one piece of evidence, right? You can't just trust one little thing that says, hey, this is probably true. No, you do have to go for a while. You do have to understand many evidences to trust something. Like when you take a step into your kitchen, you understand that it's your kitchen, you've been in there a couple hundred times, but it's also your same feet, and you also trust your feet, and you also trust your mind that you can control your feet, right? So there are many evidences that get us to believe that something is real. All right, so let's dive into the first few evidences here. Order does not come from chaos. That is the first evidence. If we look around in our universe, people are going to say, well, no, that's not very true. It's actually very chaotic. But when we look at specifically Earth, it is actually very orderly compared to all the other planets out there. Okay, and all these are going to build up to one thing. So I'm just going to state a couple of these, brush over them, not dive too much into them, but these are the simple statements, and then I'll get into the more heavy side. Design does not come from randomness. Right? It doesn't make sense to me how the design of the universe, and some people like Richard Dawkins do say that the design is an illusion. Which, is it possible that all of the beauty is an illusion? Yeah, that is possible. And is it beautiful to everyone? No, not exactly, but there is some sort of a design that everything adheres to. Design, right? If I look at a piece of artwork in a museum, I don't have to love it to recognize that that is designed, okay? Let's talk a little bit more about that one, because that is one of the main principles we're going to be going off of here, is that if I look at a car and I say that a car, actually an explosion happened one time in a rust shop, okay? And all the pieces actually exploded together into that perfect car, working car, with gas in it. You'd say, what are you talking about? That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And now, again, some people might not consider this all design, but the truth of the matter, we'll get into a little bit deeper later about how we definitely know it is designed and it does adhere to specific rules. One of those statements is going to be, life does not come from non-life. Lots of people like to bring up evolution. Evolution is possible, even in the Christian realm, although I don't think it's the most biblical perspective. It is possible that evolution is the manner of which God used to create humans. And Richard Dawkins, again, I'm going to keep mentioning him, I've done some studies on him, admits that if you want to say that God used evolution to create humans, okay, I can't disprove you, right? That's one of those things that God could have used evolution, but people like to say that evolution is how life got created. But there is actually no evolutionary theory out there that says that non-life turned to life. Something does not come from nothing, right? And that's what that kind of leads us to understand, is that something, if there is ever something, which there is something, right? We have something. If anything, even if none of this is real, we have consciousness, right? So if there is something out there, which there is, we can understand that there is, then there must have always been something, because you can never, ever, ever get something from nothing. Because why? Because nothing is literally just that, nothing, right? There is no thing. So when we have something, we know that something must be eternal. Something must have always existed. Or it could have been many things, right? It could have been many things that have always existed, but there must have been at least something that has always existed. And when we look at our universe, they used to say, hundreds of years ago, that the universe was eternal. But now we have really strong evidence, right? Some of Einstein's theories point directly to the fact that the universe is not eternal, okay? So now we're starting to get into some of the heavier side, and just bear with me as I go through these. Time, space, and matter. Those three things, when we talk about the beginning of the universe, right? Now that we're talking about, okay, the universe must have started. Well, this is an important concept too, that there are no multiverses, because there could just be an eternal chain of multiverses. Well, here's an important fact, is that everything, all matter must have come into existence at the same time. So either the Big Bang Theory is completely off and completely untrustworthy, but we actually have all the evidence that we can support it, right? And that's because of the way the universe expanded, right? If we trace that all back to one point, well, it comes back to one point. And at some point, that one point must have exploded into motion. But it's not an eternal point. We understand that the universe is 13.8 billion years old. So all of matter must have come into existence at the same time. All of space, right? All of the amount of space that we have, like space between objects, right? Empty space. That must have come into existence at some point. And because we have only 13.8 billion years of our universe, it must have come into existence 13.8 billion years ago. But Einstein's one of Einstein's theories states that time, space, and matter must all exist at the same time. You can't have space and matter but no time, because when would you put it? And you can't have time and matter but no space, because where did you put it? And you can't have no space, no matter, but you can have time and space, because what did you put, right? So that's the idea of, you must have time, space, and matter all together, and they all came into existence all at one point 13.8 billion years ago, according to what we know in science. So when you look at that, you say, okay, everything was created 13.8 billion years ago. But we also understand that everything cannot come from nothing. So there must have been some eternal thing that created that, right? Something that was spaceless, something that was timeless, something that was matterless, which when people ask, okay, well, who created God? Well, no one created God because he is timeless. He doesn't need a beginning. He doesn't have a beginning. Spaceless. He doesn't take up space, or matterless, right? He is not anything. He is spirit in some sense. So that is that, right? We take that now. We have time, space, and matter. Okay. So that is where we get the first idea of, okay, God definitely must have existed. But then I want to jump back to the design side for a second. The whole universe, since the beginning of the universe, sticks to very strict laws. And these laws cannot be random, and they're not necessary. So let me explain what I mean by each of those things. These laws, the speed of light, right? The speed of light, unless if it's manipulated, which I don't know how it can be manipulated, but even if it is, the speed of light has a constant, right? And I don't know the constant off the top of my head right now, but the speed of light has a constant. One second. Right, so the speed of light has this constant, and it's a specific number, and it's been that way as long as we can tell. And there are many numbers like this. I'm not quite researched well enough to know all these numbers and such, but I know some cases that I've heard laid out have all these numbers laid out that are just constants. And there are I mean, I'm pretty sure there are well over 50 of these constants that must have been the exact way they are in order for us to live. But that gets into a little bit different of an argument. I just want to talk about the fact that they exist and the fact that they're constant. That doesn't come from randomness. If it was all random, the constants wouldn't have to be constant. There would be nothing constant because you can't get randomness. Those odds, right? The odds of that happening, the odds of those being constant is absolutely stupendous, right? It's impossible. By all scientific means, it is impossible. And without a multiverse, well, now you get a little confused, and you say all these things line up, and all these things have these constants that are actually staying still, so it can't be random. Okay, then what do we have here? Well, we have a consistent universe, right, according to certain constants, and these laws are in fact fine-tuned, and this talks about the teleological argument. The teleological argument is the fine-tuning argument, which basically talks about the fact that everything is super fine-tuned for life. And a lot of atheists like to say, well, look at the universe, look how stars are exploding, look how all these things, that is so chaotic, that doesn't seem fine-tuned to me at all. Well, that's exactly the point, is it's not fine-tuned for every single thing to exist. But the weird part is, for one planet of humans, we have never found any other life in the entire universe, as I already mentioned, and yet everything seems to add up for just this one planet of humans. Everything adds up. In fact, it is the perfect conditions for this one species, right? So that draws you to say, geez, out of all the things in the universe, nothing comes even close to the fine-tuning of the circumstances for humans to live on one planet in one solar system, right? So now you have fine-tuning. You have the fact that these laws are consistent and exist. You have the fact that the universe even exists, which is called the cosmological argument. It must have had a start from a timeless, spaceless, matterless creator in some sense, right? So we can draw from all of these different things, and there are plenty more arguments too, right? We have the moral argument. A lot of people like to bring up the argument from reason, all these different arguments. But I want to deliver this in a very straightforward way. When you look around and see consistency and consistency, creation, all these different things, and the ability that you have to live today, right? Some scientist says out of all of in the reproduction process, it's a 1 in 400 trillion chance that you are the one who lives. Now, of course, that's just a chance, right? Maybe, of course, one of them had to make it through, which some people will say that's an evidence. But I just want you to consider just the chance that you're alive. Now consider the chances that your parents are alive. And for generations and generations, we've been consistently having life, human life. It is impossible by all scientific means if you want to say that everything is just materialistic, right? If everything started from materials, it doesn't work out. The odds are not in those favors. If you want to believe in favors, you have to believe in a God. That is not because our science is limited. Our science has found many, many things, and our science has actively proven that we do need a God to exist. It's not the God of the gaps like the people used to say, where it was just like, well, we don't know, so God. It's nothing like that. It's in fact that everything we find points to Creator, right? So many, many, many arguments we have. I believe in God from all those things, right? I believe in God without ever looking at the Bible. I can say, oh my goodness, there has to be a God. And that God has to be a personal God, because the universe just seems fine-tuned just for humans. So it seems like that God is a personal God. Okay, so where do we go from here? Well, the existence of the Bible and the canon of the Bible is actually one of the strongest supporting evidences for God, but also for Christianity, obviously, right? And I'm just going to run over a couple things here. I'm going to state them as facts. Do your research into this, okay? Go looking into your research. I'm going to tell you a couple things about the Bible, though, and how it adds up. Number one, it's perfectly unique. There is no other book with the typology and the writing style and the collection of writings that the Bible has, right? From 2,000 years ago, no one would have written that women were the first people to go see the resurrected Jesus, right? And there are hundreds of ideas like that in the Bible. It's very unique, and it's very down to earth in that way, where it's very realistic. Anyways, number two, it's perfectly consistent. Many people come up with contradictions like the staff, no staff, before the Sabbath, after the Sabbath, when was Jesus crucified, the Mary Magdalene, how many angels were there, all these things. But I want to tell you about explicit contradictions versus apparent contradictions. Explicit contradictions are things that are directly contradictory, that you must say they are a contradiction. But if you don't have the explicit writing that says, like for the staff, if the staff example, if you don't know what I'm talking about, you can look it up. But one verse says, this is what people portray it as. People portray it as take a staff and don't take a staff. But that is not what the verses say. That would be an explicit contradiction of accounts, right? Take a staff, do not take a staff. You must take a staff, you must not take a staff. Those are direct contradictions. That's called an explicit contradiction. And that counts as a contradiction right up front, right? We know for a fact that's a contradiction. But when you have it say, take nothing on your journey, if anything a staff, and the other one says, take nothing on your journey, not even a staff. It seems, at face level, it's a little bit blurry, right? One says to take, if anything, a staff, and one says nothing, okay? The point that the author was trying to make was that no staff, right? You cannot take a staff on your journey. But if anything, you can take one staff, okay? So does that other one miss the contradiction? Well, no, the statement was to not take a staff. The statement was to take nothing on your journey. But if you're going to not take anything, take a staff, right? So that's one example of an apparent contradiction, that even if it was a contradiction and they meant to write it as a contradiction, it's not explicitly a contradiction, so we can't count it as a contradiction. We have to say, okay, there is a chance to reconcile this, and just because there's a chance, we actually cannot say that this is, in fact, for sure a contradiction. So it is consistent. Number three, it's written as a history book. There was no such thing as fiction back then. They're not trying to make up fiction or conspiracy theories. It is written as a history book. And therefore, it is either a truth or a lie, right? You can't say it's some way truth in here and some way truth in here, but it's got this spiritual truth, but this is also false. It is either a truth or a lie, okay? Number four, there's extra biblical confirmation
of the existence, the miracles, the claims, the values, and the resurrection of Jesus Christ of Nazareth. Okay? Extra biblical means outside the Bible. Outside the Bible, people confirmed and died for the fact that Jesus did these miracles, that he saved them, that he did these things. And there are many, many extra biblical confirmations. You can look them up. You don't have to rely solely on the Bible to prove the Bible is true, right? That would be stupidity and circular logic. All right. Many people have completely changed from what they were raised in, being completely safe, to be willing to be martyred or killed for their faith in Jesus. Not just the 12 apostles of Jesus, right? Or the 11, but more than that. Way. In the first century, there's an estimated hundreds to thousands of martyrs, murdered people for their faith in Jesus Christ. Most of them who actually met him in the first century. Then in the second century, thousands at least. And then in the third century, tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands are the estimations. And those people did not see Jesus, of course, but these people's faith are drastic and serious. And yes, you can say, well, other religions have martyrs too. Like the Jews, right? 6 million Jews in World War II got killed for their faith. Okay, I get that. I'm just saying that does point to it doesn't necessarily point to the validity of the faith as much as it does just the seriousness that the people took of it. Hundreds of years later, right, that doesn't really point to the validity. But now the people in the first century who were actual eyewitnesses, that does actually bring some validity to the table of these people genuinely believed what they saw. They were not sitting on a lie, and they were eyewitnesses. They were well known to be with Jesus and knowing him. Number 6, the consistency of wisdom over thousands of years. People might dispute this one, but I find that when you live according to the standards of the Bible, the wisdom standards, the ethical standards, the lifestyle standards, the financial standards, all these things, it has lasted over thousands of years as reliable, consistent wisdom for people in their life to lead them into a life that is going to work out and for a life that's going to actually bring joy into their life. The wisdom has not failed, okay? So that's my experience. That's what I've always seen. I've never seen anyone follow the path of the Bible and be left disappointed. Never seen it. Okay, number 7, my personal testimony, right? My life, the way that Jesus changed my life. I get that that's not a infallible proof, right? And that's not even as much of a proof as it is just to say, people in Islam could say that. People as Mormons could say that. People as anyone could say that, yeah, my personal testimony proves Jesus. It does not necessarily prove Jesus, but it has convinced me in my own mind, when I put my faith in Jesus, X, Y, and Z happened. And X, Y, and Z saved my life in these different ways, right? So when I have that, that's something reliably confirmational to me. And that's something that I can take in and say, this is why I'm a Christian, is because in my life, that's what stood out. Okay, so those are some of the 7 things that I wanted to say about the Bible specifically. There's tons more of evidences to come on this channel, and I'm very excited for it. I'm very excited to dive all into it. So these are just some of the evidences, though. I hope you consider these and take these seriously. And this leads me to my conclusion. If Jesus was who he said he was, this is the most important decision in your life, to follow him. I'm not asking you to go to a church. I understand those traumas, okay? I'm not asking you to say a sinner's prayer. I'm asking you to buy a Bible. Look at the Word. Look at the eyewitness testimonies and see what they have to say about the man who lived and died and rose again. Look at the evidences. Take an open mind. Approach the gospel of Jesus. If you find that, if you think it's false and if you believe that it's false, let's reason together. Let's talk. And if you want to try to convince me out of my faith, okay, let's go. Let's talk. I'm open to discussion. I'm always open to hearing. And it is really important because it's life-changing. Okay? If you find that, hey, this stuff is true and I don't know what steps are next, talk to me as well. Let's go. Let's talk, okay? But
No matter where you find yourself, Jesus loves you. Okay? And that is the love of God for you. The love of the man who created you, who was there with God in your creation, who knows the plans that he has for you, which are good plans, and plans to bring you to success and joy and peace, even in your pain. So, at the beginning of this video, I talked about pain. I want to remind you, there's a better life. And as a Christian, but not just a Christian who's subscribing to this religion, but as a person with a personal relationship with God, I know that Jesus loves me just as much as he loves every single other person to ever exist. It's a hard concept, I get it. Do yourself a favor, buy a Bible, talk to people, have an open mind. There is a better life waiting for you. And it is more abundant, more peaceful, more joyful, and not based on delusion, but based on the facts that we have about our world. All right, keep it up, everyone. Jesus loves you. I love you guys. Peace.